Mark Callahan's lungs burned as he tore through the rain-slick arteries of New Proxima Station, the pounding of his boots drowned by the roar of neon signs and the metallic echoes of pursuit. The station never slept. Its alleys were a maze of steam vents, holoads flickering in 20 languages, and the shadows of commerce, both legal and otherwise. Tonight, all of it seemed to conspire against him. Behind, the guttural voices of Taurian enforcers cut through the noise, their heavy steps shaking the decking. They wanted blood. More specifically, they wanted his 50,000 credits. That was the weight hanging over him, heavier than the damp jacket clinging to his shoulders. He could almost hear the sneer of Drax, the syndicate boss he'd crossed, promising to take either repayment or flesh. Mark cursed under his breath, dodging a street vendor's cart and ducking beneath a low-hanging pipe, the sweat on his brow mixing with rain until it stung his eyes. The irony wasn't lost on him. Years of service in the Earth Defense Force, trained to survive in hostile alien jungles and derelict orbital battlefields, and he was about to get cornered in the entertainment hub of the sector because of a rigged card game. The game had been a trap from the start. No one pulls 4 royal flushes in a row without a loaded deck, but try explaining probability curves to a Taurian bruiser with fists like wrecking balls. He had walked into the syndicate's snare with a soldier's arrogance and a gambler's hunger, and now the bill had come due. He skidded around a corner and saw a service door left ajar. Authorized personnel only glared at him in half a dozen scripts. His instincts screamed at him to keep running, but military training and desperation aligned in a single moment of clarity. Escape routes weren't chosen, they were seized. He shoved through the door and slammed it behind him, finding himself in a dimly lit corridor that reeked of disinfectant and cleaning solvent. Signs plastered the walls and station standard glyphs, but one caught his racing eyes. Emerald Valkyries. Athletic facility. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Everyone on New Proxima knew them. Champions of intersystem combat sports, broadcast across 17 systems. Emerald-skinned warriors, whose matches he had once bet on and won. A flicker of hope flared through the adrenaline haze. Maybe fortune was finally shifting. The bang of the service door behind him crushed that thought. They were still on his trail. He sprinted deeper, through another set of doors, and into a space that smelled of sweat and faint alien perfume. A locker room. His pulse spiked as laughter drifted from a shower area, unmistakably female, confident, unhurried. Panic clawed at his throat. Trapped between the Taurian hounds and the wrong kind of sanctuary, his options dwindled to one dot in the corner sat a massive cylindrical container, the universal laundry symbol emblazoned on its side. Mark hesitated only a second before ripping open the lid. The bin was half filled with uniforms and towels that reeked of training and herbal soap. "This is insane," he muttered, but survival didn't ask for dignity. He climbed in, pulled the lid shut, and tried to breathe shallowly through his mouth. Through the thin metal came muffled voices, the enforcers barging in, demanding answers, and a cool, female voice dismissing them with iron certainty. The silence that followed was worse than combat. Then the container tilted. Mark yelped as it toppled, the lid clattering open, spilling him and a cascade of damp fabric onto the locker room floor. He scrambled upright, heart hammering, and froze. 3 pairs of violet eyes fixed on him. Emerald skin glistened with moisture. Under the locker room lights, silver hair cascading over powerful shoulders. Wrapped in short white towels, their muscular frames radiated strength, beauty, and danger in equal measure. The tallest stepped forward, lips curling into an amused smile as she reached back to lock the door. "Looks like Lux isn't on your side tonight, human," she said, melodic and sharp all at once. The second folded her arms, grin widening. But maybe that's a good thing. The third circled behind him, cutting off escape, her predatory. Eyes gleaming. "What's your name, laundry boy?" Mark brushed a damp sock off his shoulder, forcing himself to stand straight despite the heat rushing to his face. He had stared down plasma rifles and alien war beasts before, but never like this. "Mark Callahan," he said, deciding honesty was all he had left. "And I can explain." The tallest's smile widened, violet eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Oh, we're counting on it." In that moment, Mark realized his night had taken a turn stranger and far more dangerous than he ever imagined. Mark stood rooted to the damp floor, trying not to look as out of place as he felt. 3 warriors, emerald-skinned and towel-clad, stared at him like hunters deciding whether to chase or play. Their expressions weren't hostile, not yet, but they weren't merciful either. The tallest stepped closer, water still dripping from her silver hair onto sculpted shoulders, and with a tilt of her head she introduced herself. "I'm Lixa," she said, her voice carrying both command and amusement. She gestured lightly toward the other 2. "That's Talia, and the scarred one behind you is Kira. We're the Emerald Valkyries." Mark swallowed hard. Of course they were. Champions, legends on 17 systems. Faces splashed across holoscreens during every major combat broadcast. He'd watched them fight, even wagered credits on their victory more than once. And now he'd practically delivered himself into their quarters like a badly wrapped gift. "Nice to meet you," he managed, lifting his hands in a half-hearted surrender. "Look, I didn't mean to intrude. I was being chased. Debt collectors. Not the kind you reason with." Kira chuckled, crossing her arms as she leaned against the lockers. The scar running down her collarbone looked fresh enough to warn anyone not to test her. "Debt collectors, huh? Let me guess. Torian?" Mark grimaced. "You guessed right. 50,000 credits." Saying the number aloud made his stomach knot. Talia let out a low whistle, brushing water from her long hair. "That's not just a gambling problem. That's a death sentence." "What did you do? Lose a warship in a card game?" "It was rigged," Mark said, a touch more heat in his voice than he'd intended. 4 royal flushes in a row. No one's that lucky. "Except you thought you were," Kira teased, though there was no malice in it. Mark opened his mouth to retort, but Lixa stepped closer, close enough that the scent of her ozone mixed with something sharp and sweet filled his senses. "Most humans in your situation would be trembling right now. You're not. Should I be?" Mark asked carefully, forcing his blue eyes to meet hers. "Definitely," she answered with a slow smile. But she didn't strike him, didn't call security. Instead, she studied him like a puzzle worth solving. Something shifted in the air. The immediate threat faded, replaced by a charged curiosity. For the first time since he'd tumbled into the laundry bin, Mark allowed a thin breath of relief. "So," Talia said, stepping forward and resting a hand on her hip, "what exactly was your plan after hiding in our dirty uniforms?" "I hope it was better than wait and hope." Mark let out a short laugh, despite himself. "Survival first, planning second. That's how it usually goes." The 3 exchanged glances, silent communication that spoke of long years fighting together, of trust built through countless battles. When they looked back at him, their expressions had softened, but not entirely. "You might be useful," Lixa said at last, folding her arms. "We've got a problem of our own, a problem that requires flexible morals." Mark arched a brow. "Flexible how?" Kira grinned, stepping closer, her silver hair brushing his arm. "Let's just say not everyone in the arena plays fair. Our rivals keep winning matches they shouldn't, and we're tired of losing to cheaters." Mark blinked, then felt a slow smile curve across his lips. "Cheaters? I've got some experience with those." Talia's laughter rang out, warm and melodic. Then maybe your unlucky laundry dive wasn't so unlucky after all. For the first time that night, Mark Callahan felt a flicker of something beyond fear possibility. He was still hunted, still broke, still trapped on a station crawling with Taurian enforcers. But standing here in a locker room with three of the most dangerous women in the sector, he had the oddest sense that his luck might be changing. And when Lixa extended her hand toward him, violet eyes gleaming, he didn't hesitate. He took it. "Welcome." "To the team, Mark," she said. "Let's see what you're really made of." Mark adjusted the collar of the station-issue jumpsuit Talia had scrounged for him, its dark blue fabric stretching across his shoulders. The Emerald Valkyrie's insignia stylized emerald wing blazed across the back, marking him as their new equipment manager. He caught his reflection in the glossy surface of a locker and almost laughed. A week ago, he'd been just another gambler circling drain pipes. Now he was strapping on a tool belt like he actually belonged here. "Keep your head down," Lixa reminded him, leaning against the nutrition bar with casual authority. In workout gear, she looked every inch the warrior, but her eyes stayed. Sharp, calculating. "Your maintenance staff now. Invisible. Nobody notices the ones hauling towels and tightening bolts." Kira's grin widened from where she lounged against a training bench. "Unless you screw up, then everyone notices." Mark shot her a dry look. "Encouraging. Thanks." Talia flicked through a holodisplay, pulling up images of their rivals. Cobalt blue skin, crimson hair, lithe builds the Azure Furies. They looked every bit the part of champions, but their winning streak screamed otherwise. They've taken 3 titles in a row. Statistically impossible unless their entire team woke up blessed by gods. Or by chemistry, Lixa added. She slid a small case across the bar toward Mark. Inside lay 3 metallic discs no larger than a credit chip. Sleek, matte black, surveillance devices, regulation adjacent, undetectable by standard sweeps. Plant them in the Azure Furies. Locker room, training area, and medical bay. We'll do the rest. Mark picked up one of the discs, weighing it in his palm. Its cold edges bit into his skin. "And if I get caught?" Kira leaned forward, violet eyes glinting. "Then we'll have to rescue you, which might be fun for us." He smirked despite the tight knot in his gut. Comforting. By the time he left the Valkyrie's quarters, his pulse was steady, the way it had been before ops back in the Earth Defense Force. He'd infiltrated enemy compounds, exfiltrated prisoners under fire, walked minefields that hadn't seen daylight in decades. This was just another mission, he told himself. Except instead of comrades in combat armor, he had 3 half-dressed athletes who laughed at his expense and flirted between strategy notes. Somehow, that made it harder to focus. The Azure Fury facility was 2 sectors away, tucked into the station's athletic ring. Mark walked with the slow confidence of a man meant to be there, tool belt clinking just enough to sound authentic. A couple of station guards gave him a cursory glance, then dismissed him. Confidence was camouflage. He wore it well. He slipped past the access doors and forged credentials. Talia had burned through a security subroutine. Inside, the locker room gleamed with silver-blue decor, spotless and humming with climate control. Mark crouched, pried open, a panel behind the benches, and slipped the first disc into place. It clung magnetically to the frame. Invisible once the panel was sealed in the training hall, he moved quickly, attaching the second disc to a light fixture high above the mats. His hands were steady, but sweat prickled at his temple. Every second felt borrowed. The medical bay was the last stop. He stepped inside, tools jangling his cover, but froze when he spotted something odd. A locked cabinet in the corner, armored with military-grade encryption, way beyond what any sports team needed. He crouched, examining the lock without touching. It then clipped the third disc nearby. His earpiece crackled. "Status?" Lix's voice, low and measured. "2 planted. Thirds in. And I've found something else." Military secured storage in the med bay. A pause, then Talia's sharp intake of breath. "That's excessive. What the hell are they hiding?" "Hopefully our proof," Mark murmured, closing the panel and standing. The corridor outside rattled with voices. Too many footsteps. His wrist terminal flashed red. Training schedule updated. Azure Furies inbound in 5 minutes. "Problem," he hissed. "They're early." "Abort and exfil," Lixa ordered. He turned and froze. The corridor ahead was blocked by 2 massive silhouettes, Taurian enforcers. One of them lifted a holographic image, Mark's face glaring back at him. Mark's chest tightened. No way back. No way forward, I think, he whispered into the com. I just ran out of luck. He forced himself to walk forward, head high, wearing confidence like armor. But the moment the first enforcer's eyes narrowed, recognition. Flashing. Mark knew the mission was about to get messy. Mark ducked through the side door of the Azure Furies. Medical bay just as the corridor behind him filled with heavy Taurian footfalls. His instincts screamed for a clean exit, but there was none. The sound of voices grew louder, the guttural bark of orders in the syndicate tongue. He spotted a hydrotherapy unit against the far wall, its piping disappearing into a narrow access. "Panel. Kira," he whispered into the com, his breath short. "Tell me you've got a way out of here." "Panel behind the hydro unit," she replied instantly. "Maintenance tunnels. It'll be tight, but you'll fit." Mark ripped the panel free, wincing at the squeal of stressed metal, and squeezed himself inside. The darkness swallowed him whole. The only light came from the faint green glow of his wrist terminal, casting fractured shadows along the cramped conduit. The air was hot, stale, thick with dust and the sour tang of lubricant. He crawled forward on hands and knees, the tunnel, barely wide enough for his shoulders. Sweat ran down his temple, and his heart drummed like a war alarm. Behind him, faint at first, then louder, came the scrape of someone else forcing their way inside. "Contact," he breathed. But before the Valkyries could respond, the confined space erupted with violence. A Taurian enforcer lunged from the shadows, tusked mouth curling into a snarl. His bulk barely fit the shaft, his arms thick as hydraulic pistons. He seized Mark's throat with one clawed hand, pinning him against the tunnel wall. The press of raw strength drove the air from Mark's lungs. "Human vermin," the Taurian growled, hot breath thick with the scent of iron. "Drax wants his money." "Or your head." Mark clawed at the grip, his vision dimming. Old instincts surged. EDF training drilled into bone. He didn't have the strength, but he had leverage. Twisting his body sideways, he jammed his shoulder into the Taurian's arm, using the narrow walls as a weapon. Metal groaned as he shoved, driving the enforcer's head into the bulkhead. The alien bellowed, but didn't let go. His claws scraped skin, tearing fabric. Mark's pulse thundered in his ears. With a desperate shift, he brought his knee up, ramming it into what he prayed was a vulnerable spot. The Taurian howled, grip loosening just enough for Mark to twist. "Free, Mark." Kira's voice rang in his ear. "Status?" He couldn't answer. He slammed an elbow into the enforcer's jaw, scrambled forward, and clawed through the darkness on all fours. Behind him, the Taurian thrashed, wedged awkwardly in the tunnel, snarling promises of violence. The passage forked. "Left!" Lixa's voice snapped over comms. "Emergency hatch in 20 meters." "Hurry!" Mark veered left, lung-searing, dragging himself through the filth and heat until his hands struck a circular latch. He spun it, shoved with his shoulder, and the hatch groaned open onto blinding light and the murmur of a crowded concourse. He spilled out onto the polished deck, drawing. Sharp looks from passers-by. His jumpsuit was smeared with dust, his throat raw with claw marks, but he forced himself upright, adjusting the tool belt like nothing was wrong. Then a heavy hand clamped his shoulder. Mark turned slowly, heart dropping. Another Taurian loomed. Behind him, tusks gleaming in the concourse light. "Going somewhere, Callahan?" The enforcer rumbled, lips curling. Mark's mind raced for options, but before he could speak, a melodic voice cut through the crowd. "There you are, darling. I've been looking everywhere for you." Lixa slid into view, silver hair damp from training, violet eyes sparkling with feigned innocence. She laced her arm through his, with a lover's casual intimacy, pressing close. To the watching crowd, they looked inseparable. "Is there a problem, sir?" She asked the Taurian, her tone sugared steel. For a heartbeat, the enforcer faltered, clearly unprepared for this sudden complication. Mark kept his face neutral, but inside, adrenaline buzzed like fire through his veins. In that instant, standing, with Lixa shielding him beneath the gaze of half the station, Mark realized something had shifted. He wasn't just a fugitive anymore. He was under the Valkyrie's protection. And that made him dangerous in ways the Taurian syndicate hadn't yet learned to fear. The private transport pod hummed as it carried them away from the concourse, lights flickering against the curve of the glass canopy. Mark sat with his back against the wall, every muscle aching from the crawl through the tunnels, from the Taurian's grip on his throat, from the sheer effort of staying alive. Lixa sat beside him, her arm still linked through his, but the playful pretense from the concourse had melted into something sharper. Her violet eyes scanned his injuries with a soldier's focus. "You're bleeding," she said, brushing her fingers lightly over the red marks on his neck. "I've had worse," Mark muttered, though his voice rasped. He caught the flicker of anger in her expression, not directed at him, but at the enemies circling closer every hour. Talia was already pacing the length of the pod, her athletic frame radiating restless energy. The Taurian syndicate knows he's with us now. There's no way to keep this quiet anymore. Kira leaned forward, elbows resting on her knees. "So, let them know. It makes no difference. We've fought worse than debt collectors." "Not like this," Talia shot back. "Drax's syndicate. He'll have officials on his payroll, guards, mercenaries. And if Vox is really involved," she cut herself off. Fists clencing. Mark spoke up before the tension boiled over. "Then hiding isn't an option. We make the fight public." 3 sets of eyes turned to him. Lixa tilted her head, curious. "Go on." Mark took a breath. His military training had taught him the value of turning weakness into bait. The Azure Furies want to keep winning. They need the neural enhancers to do it. So we trap them where they can't cheat without being exposed. A public match. Broadcast. With pre-match medical scans. Kira's grin spread slow and predatory. Force them to show their hand in front of the entire station. "Exactly," Mark said. "If they refuse the scans, everyone knows why. If they take them and get caught, they lose everything. Either way, they're exposed. And the whole station sees it happen." "But Drax," Talia said, skeptical. "He won't just let you walk free because the Furies get humiliated." Mark nodded. "That's where the wager comes in. My debt, 50,000 credits, against the outcome of the match. If the Valkyries win, the debt is nullified on record announced by the commissioner in front of witnesses." Silence stretched for a long moment. Then Lix's lips curved into the faintest smile. "You'd bet your life on us." Mark met her gaze steadily. "I already am." Kara laughed, low and delighted, pushing off her seat to slap him on the back. Finally, a human who thinks with more than fear. Talia exhaled slowly, tension draining into reluctant amusement. It's insane, reckless, dangerous. And it could work, Lixa finished, her eyes gleaming with something like pride. If we win, the debt vanishes. The Furies are disqualified, and the Syndicate loses its leverage. Mark allowed himself a small smile. I've always believed in stacking the odds. And right now, the only way forward is to make sure everyone's watching. The pod slowed as it entered the Valkyries. Private hangar, the hiss of the docking clamps echoing like a heartbeat. As the doors opened and the four of them stepped out, Mark realized his path was set. He wasn't just running anymore. He was about to gamble everything not at a card table, but in the arena, on the strength of 3 emerald-skinned warriors. And the fragile unity they had begun to build together and for the first time in weeks, it felt like the kind of gamble he could win. The new Proxima Arena pulsed like a living heart, its glass-domed ceiling awash in shifting neon as thousands of voices merged into a single roar. The air buzzed with expectation, heavy with the scent of hot oils, vendor spices, and the ozone tang of charged barriers that lined the combat floor. Mark adjusted his tool belt one more time, hands moving automatically over buckles and straps. He wasn't really checking the gear, he was steadying himself, finding focus in the familiar motions of preparation. Eyes up, Lixa murmured, stepping into his line of sight. She was clad in the Valkyrie's competition armor, emerald-hued, plating over a sleek black undersuit, her silver hair braided back from her face. She looked every inch the champion she was, but her gaze softened when it fell on him. You don't need to fight tonight. You just need to believe. I do, Mark said, and he meant it. His voice carried no hesitation. The commissioner's voice boomed from the arena speakers, a tall, spindly alien who seemed too frail to carry such weight. This special challenge match between the Emerald Valkyries and the Azure Furies will be conducted under League regulations, with one additional condition agreed upon by both teams. All competitors will undergo pre-match medical scans. The scans will be broadcast to ensure transparency. The crowd erupted, half in cheer, half in jeers. The stipulation had been the talk of the station for days. To some, it was honorable. To others, humiliating. Medical drones descended like silent sentinels hovering over each competitor. Blue light swept down, capturing vitals, scanning neural pathways. Around the arena, holoscreens lit up with live data feeds. Mark's throat went dry as the Furies lined up opposite the Valkyries. Their cobalt blue skin glistened under the lights, crimson hair flowing like banners. Their captain, Narin, smirked across the floor, radiating confidence. But as the drones hummed overhead, unease flickered at the edges of her team's faces. Scanning competitor Trevin, the automated voice announced. A bar turned red on the holo. Anomaly detected. Unauthorized neural enhancement present. The crowd gasped. Verification required. Another drone chimed, sweeping Trevin a second time. The same result. Confirmed. The commissioner faltered mid-sentence, his translucent skin flushing pale. Competitor Trevin is disqualified. Equipment malfunction. Nareen shouted, her voice echoing, hands clenched at her sides. Drone moved to Yala, then Marin. Both scans lit up with the same results. Neural enhancement. Neurosol-9 derivatives threaded into their pathways. Each announcement was another blow, another gasp from the crowd. On the upper level, Mark's gaze locked on a shadow moving toward the exits. Marin Vox, his wrist terminal flashing. The League official wasn't even pretending to stay neutral. No, release the insurance, Mark whispered, and Lexa tapped her terminal without hesitation. Across the arena, the holoscreens flickered and then changed. Surveillance footage filled the air. Furies in their medbay injecting themselves. Vox retrieving cases of glowing blue vials from the locked cabinet. The Taurian Syndicate's insignia pulsing on his wrist device. Chaos erupted. The crowd roared, some screaming in outrage, others cheering at the exposure of corruption. The commissioner staggered to the center, voice cracking as he shouted for order. The Azure Furies are disqualified. The Emerald Valkyries win by default. The arena thundered with noise, so loud Mark's chest vibrated with it. Up in the executive box, Drax rose, massive frame, blotting out the lights. His tusks gleamed as his gaze locked on Mark across the distance. For a heartbeat, Predator and prey regarded each other, the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Then station security poured into the stands, converging on him and his enforcers. Another team swarmed the executive level where Vox had fled. Mark's pulse hammered. The trap had sprung. His debt, his pursuers, the Furies cheating it had. All come down to this single gamble, and he'd won. The Valkyries approached him at the sidelines, armor gleaming, eyes alight with triumph. Talia threw her arm around his shoulders, nearly crushing him in her exuberance. "Told you we'd make it work," she laughed over the deafening crowd. Kira leaned close, her grin wide and dangerous. "You look good when you gamble everything." "On us." Lixa's hand found his, steady and warm despite the electric charge in the air. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Mark felt the heat of the crowd's roar, the sting of sweat and blood at his throat, the solid presence of 3 warriors at his side. He had tumbled into their laundry bin like a fool, but he had walked out of this arena, a man claimed by unity, bound by something stronger than desperation, and in the thunder of that victory, he understood the game wasn't over. It had only just begun. The roar of the crowd lingered long after the official announcement. Even as the Azure Furies were escorted out in disgrace, and Drax's bellowing was muffled under the weight of station security, the energy of the arena refused to die. New Proxima had witnessed more than a match. It had witnessed betrayal, scandal, and triumph all in one night. Mark Callahan stood at the edge of the combat floor, hands still trembling from the adrenaline. He had expected relief, maybe exhaustion, but what washed over him now was something stranger, belonging. For the first time since leaving the Earth Defense Force, he wasn't just a man surviving from one bad hand to the next. He was part of something larger. The Valkyries converged on him in a protective triangle, emerald armor gleaming under the floodlights. Talia clapped him on the back hard enough to jolt his lungs. "You did it, laundry boy. You called the play, and it worked." Kira hooked her arm through his, her grin sharp as ever. "Better than worked. You humiliated them. Drax will never recover from this." Lixa, quieter, touched her forehead to his in a Vangian gesture of trust. "You gambled your life on us. We won't forget that." Mark managed a crooked smile. "Seems to be a pattern with me. Gamble first, deal with the consequences after." "You're ours now," Kira said with mock severity, squeezing his arm. No backing out. He didn't want to. The thought surprised him. He had stumbled into their orbit by accident, tumbled out of a laundry bin like a fool. But in days, they had become his shield, his fire, his anchor. He looked at them, at their strength, their unity, their laughter, even in the face of danger, and realized he wasn't just protected. He was wanted. Later, back in the Valkyries' private quarters, the celebration was quieter, more intimate. Armor and weapons were shed, laughter softened, and the ritual of their unity began anew. The 4 of them formed a circle, hands stacked, voices low. "For harmony," Talia whispered. "For unity," Kira added. "For strength beyond self," Lixa finished. Mark placed his hand on top. "For finding family in the last place you'd expect." Their smiles told him he had spoken true. Hours later, as they lay in the calm after the storm, a soft chime broke the quiet. Talia leaned over the console, frowning at the holo feed. Another data packet from the surveillance disks. Something delayed. Mark pushed up on one elbow, the glow painting harsh lines across his face. What is it? The footage flickered to life. Not the Furies. Not Drax. A new scene. A hidden meeting. Room sterile, clinical. Marin Vox stood before a panel of shadowed figures. The insignia on their uniforms was unmistakable Earth Defense Force. Mark's chest tightened. He recognized the crest. He had worn it once, with pride. Vox's voice was clipped, precise. The trials with the Azure Furies were successful. Neurosol 9's refinement continues as scheduled. Distribution contracts with the Taurian Syndicate will ensure plausible deniability. The Council need not concern itself with failures. Humans will take the blame. The transmission cut out. Silence hung in the room, thicker than any battle fog. Talia swore softly. Kira's grin vanished. Lix's gaze turned to Mark, unreadable. His pulse hammered. The EDF hadn't just abandoned him when he refused to follow a corrupt order. They were still in the shadows, bankrolling the very poison that had nearly killed him tonight. They used me, he said, his voice low and raw. And now they're using all of you. Lix's hand closed over his, steady and unflinching. Then we fight them, together. The words should have felt like comfort. Instead, Mark felt the floor shift beneath his life yet again. He had escaped the Taurian Syndicate, exposed the Furies, and found unity with the Valkyries. But the war, that loomed now, wasn't a gamble at cards or a fight in an arena. It was something far greater and far darker. For the first time since tumbling into that laundry bin, Mark wasn't sure if luck had saved him or damned him.